Hey guys, welcome to a new and exciting podcast for me. I have always been adventurous towards the spiritual side of life, and today I have someone who I consider a good friend, and I call him B. His name is Bilal, and I want to thank you, B, for coming on and for talking to me today.
Of course, man. Appreciate you having me. You always inspire me when you do a lot of this stuff, so it's good to be on here.
Yeah, man, I appreciate that. And I brought B on because today's topic, or the first theology or talk I want to have about spirituality is about Islamic beliefs. And B, you grew up a Muslim?
That's right. Yeah. So growing up, so a little bit more context. My parents are both from Syria,
Oh, okay.
specifically Damascus in Syria, and Syria historically has a lot of different theologies, ranging from Judaism to Christianity to Islam. But
Mm-hmm.
obviously today it's predominantly Muslim. And so
Yeah.
my parents grew up Muslim. And of course, when I was born, my siblings were born. Religion was something that was very important to my mom. So not only did she teach us Islam growing up, but she also put
Mm-hmm.
us in Islamic Saturday schools where we learned Arabic, where we learned
Mm-hmm.
a lot about religion. And so growing up, it was all is always a big part of our lives.
Yeah, and that's really awesome that, your parents kind of instilled it as a youth, and some people don't like that. Some people don't like it when their parents, like I grew up, I was born and raised Catholic, and I was not a fan of it being instilled in my lifestyle, but I want to touch on that because there's a lot of ignorance, or at least a lot of uninformed people when it comes to Islamic beliefs, and I kind of want to know, maybe from your side, what the difference between like a Muslim and like between the race and between the religion, because I know that there's a lot of conflict there and some people don't understand the difference.
Yeah, well, ironically, when people think Islam, they sort of think Arab, and
Yeah.
it's kind of ironic because actually most of the Muslims that make up Islam in the world are actually African American or Asian, right? So when
Hmm.
you think of countries like Malaysia or Indonesia, those are predominantly Muslim countries, but people
Hmm.
don't think about that. People just think of Afghanistan and Iraq and all these other countries that the U.S. invaded as being Muslim, but
Hmm.
that's definitely not the case. In terms of stereotypes and all of that, it's definitely a thing, right? I think for
Yeah.
me, growing up ever since 9/11, there's
Hmm.
definitely been this Islamophobia is sort of what it's called, what Muslims refer
Yeah.
to
Yeah. I mean,
in this country and elsewhere. And it's real,
yeah.
right? Some people felt it more than others, but it
Hmm.
ranged from racism to being made fun of to you can imagine all of that. And I think a lot of kids growing up were definitely impacted and affected by it.
Yeah. And for someone like me who I was completely at that age when 9/11 happened, I mean, I had zero Muslim friends,
Yeah,
and I was not in touch with what it would feel like to be on that side. And so growing up, I, became a flight attendant. I kind of met a whole variety of different cultures.
hmm
And learning about this now, um, you know, it's very unfortunate that that happened. And so, what was the biggest challenge in changing people's perspective? What would you say was like the hardest conversations you would have when people were like,
yeah.
being treated like you were evil or bad without them even knowing you?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think the hardest thing is restraint, right? Like if someone is being ignorant about your religion or your culture, the hardest thing you
Yeah.
could do is actually just be patient and be restrained with them, right? Because you have to realize they're coming from a place of ignorance or lack of education, or
Yeah.
they're just getting their source of information from friends or family who might be very biased, or news sources that might be very biased. And
Sure.
so, really, it's on you to sort of educate them and show them the humility that, hey, even though you're going to say this about me, I'm not going to react, right? I'm not going to attack back, or I'm not going to make fun of you back. And so
Yeah.
that's really the biggest challenge, is how do you sort of restrain yourself in order
Yeah.
to actually look at the bigger picture and help educate these people, because these people want to inflame you. They want to see you get crazy because then you fit the stereotype, and
Yeah.
then they confirm that, and then they can move on. So the hardest thing is really just sitting down with them and just explaining. And
Yeah.
it's going to be something that takes time, and they also have to be willing and open-minded enough to actually accept what you're telling them. And so there's a lot of different variables, but I think the hardest thing is definitely just being having restraint and having that patience to make sure you're not overdoing it and really just focused on the education piece.
Yeah, and actually, you touched on a couple things that I want to ask about. Now, me as a person of color, and my race or ethnicity is sometimes unidentifiable. For
Mm-hmm.
example, some people think I'm Afghani. Some people have told me I look Indian. Some people think I'm Mexican. I've been called everything pretty much. When I was in Turkey, everybody thought I was a Turkish man,
Mm-hmm.
and for you as well, when I look at you, I could be like, oh, maybe he could pass for Latino, maybe he could pass for something else. Like I don't know you're from Syria. Like that's just one of the things that we kind of like see, and we can make our own judgments or whatever. But when it comes to, for example, the women in Islamic beliefs, some choose to wear the hijab. Is that how you pronounce it?
Right. Yep, that's right.
Yeah. And I want you to touch base on that a little bit. You did share a story about your sister with me, but before you share that story, because I think it is a great story to listen to, I also wanted to know, what some people are, when you see a woman wearing a hijab, they're identifiable as a Muslim, right?
Correct.
So
Mm-hmm.
how do you think? Why do you think people perceive that, um, or view that negatively?
Yeah, for a lot of people on the outside looking on the inside, when they see the hijab, they think of oppression, right? They think
Yeah.
that a woman is forced into wearing that. They don't realize it actually stands a lot for empowerment. And women in Islam can decide to wear it or not to wear it, right? And it's
That
totally
was
up to
something I
them.
didn't know. Yeah, that was
Yeah,
something I didn't
it's
know.
totally up to them. And if I can give you a very personal example, like my sister, she decided to wear the hijab when she was around 15 or 16. And
Mhm.
actually, my parents were against it. Actually, all of us were against it, right? Because we feared for her living in this country and being so young, we feared any sort of backlash or bias or racism that people might have towards her that might impact her, who knows, getting into college or getting a job or meeting people
Yeah.
or making new friends, right? So we were actually against her wearing it, but she felt empowered enough and she felt that it made sense for her to actually put it on because she got a sense of
Yeah.
security from it, that she wanted to go ahead and do it, right? And it was 100% her decision again, and she went
Yeah.
against her own family's opinion on if she should or shouldn't do it. So it's something that, again, if you don't really understand or have the education to really look into the meaning behind it, it's all about self-empowerment, right? And it's up to each individual person to
Yeah.
decide if they want to wear it or not wear it, and it's totally up to them.
No, and that's great. Good for her for standing up for her beliefs, and embracing her power. And that was something I didn't know, and I'm glad I was able to learn. Because when you're looking at it like as an outsider, you do see a lot of stereotypes, or you hear stereotypes, and I kind of wanted to touch on that now. There are a lot of stereotypes for every race, culture, and so
Right.
on. So maybe you can touch on how your beliefs are, or because correct me if I'm wrong, just like in Christianity, there's different branches. Are there different branches in Islamic beliefs?
Yeah, and in Islamic belief, there are multiple different branches. The two main groups that they roll up under is Sunni Islam, which probably compromises anywhere from 80 to 85% of all Muslims. And
Mm-hmm.
then you've got 10 to 15% who identify as Shia Muslim. And to be honest, the difference is very political. In terms
Okay.
of the religion, both groups believe in one God, and the prophet is the messenger of God, right? The final prophet, the prophet Muhammad.
Okay.
In terms of like how he came into power and who took power after the Prophet Muhammad passed. That's where a lot of these political things come into play, and so there's minute differences between both religions. But
Hmm.
unfortunately, today it's been politicized to the point where both groups they don't hate each other, but they have
Yeah.
beef, which is unfortunate because they are essentially the same exact religion.
Yeah. And this is something I just learned too, and maybe you can touch on this. A
Mhm.
lot of people had the misperception that Jesus isn't recognized in Islamic belief. Can you touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, which is ironic because in the Quran, which is basically Muslims' Bible, right, or
Yeah.
Jews' Torah,
Hmm.
Jesus is actually mentioned more than the Prophet Muhammad. And the Prophet Muhammad is obviously Islam's number one figure outside of God.
Yeah.
And so Muslims 100% most definitely believe in Jesus and probably have a lot of overlap in terms of Christian beliefs for what Jesus stood for.
Yeah.
Um, but in Islam, one of the distinctions is that Jesus wasn't the son of God and he was instead a prophet, right? And he played a big role in the religion.
Yeah.
Um, but essentially, he just wasn't the son of God. That's what Muslims believe. Instead, he was actually a prophet.
Wow. See that was always a thing I didn't know. I was like, oh, Christianity is Jesus,
Yep.
Islamic beliefs are Muhammad, and like I just didn't know they like actually did include him, and that was something I learned on the show Rami,
Yep. Yep.
which if you haven't seen it, this is not I'm not getting paid for this plug, but you should totally watch the show Rami on Hulu. It actually really opened my eyes to a lot, and it's kind of what started me into this path of wanting to learn more. And I mentioned that to you when I reached out to you, and I learned a lot of really great things, beautiful things that I've seen about Islamic religion. And I want to touch base on a couple things, and then we can wrap it up. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was the washing your feet before you pray. And is this something all Muslims do?
Correct. So, in Islam, Islam's a simple religion, right? It's not what it's made out to be. It's actually a very simple religion, and it's based
Yeah,
off of five pillars. One of those pillars is prayer, right? And so
yeah,
Muslims are expected to pray 5 times a day at different times during the day. Now, before you pray, there's something called wudu, which you need to do because a big part of Islam is essentially cleanliness. Like
yeah,
Prophet Muhammad is actually known to have said, half of the religion is just cleanliness, right? So if
yeah. I
you're
love that.
clean, you're pretty much, doing half of your religion or half of your deen, which is what
Uh, as
means.
an OCD person who likes to be clean, I love that. And when they said a line in the show, like like I forgot how it went, but it was more or less, your body has to be clean
Mm-hmm.
and cleansed, or cleansed of be clean to in order to talk to God. And I thought
Exactly.
that was like such a beautiful thing because you're like you don't think about that as being a big deal, but like I mentioned to you, like I started doing this in the shower now. Like I clean myself and then I'm like, all right, God, let's have a good day.
Yep.
Let's fucking be amazing today. So yeah, please continue touching on that.
Yeah, and the big and the a big piece of Islam, not only on prayer but just the religion itself, is all about intention, right? So when you make wudu, you have to have the intention of making wudu. You have to have the intention, the conscious intention of becoming clean, so that
Yeah,
you can speak to God. And so there's a recommended practice in terms of how you can cleanse yourself, right? And that includes washing your face, washing your hands, your nostrils, your ears, like you mentioned, your feet, to make sure you hit basically everything that could accumulate dirt, right, just throughout the day. And
yeah,
so once you make wudu, then you're basically ready to go ahead and pray, and essentially like basically meet God, right? Get closer to God.
yeah,
Um, and you do this again, and anytime you do something that could or could not break your wudu, and there's a list of things, right? Like for
hmm,
example, using the bathroom. If you do use the bathroom, then the next time you go pray, you're expected to make wudu again. And again, essentially, it's just all about cleanliness, cleansing your
yeah.
soul, cleansing your mind, cleansing your body before you actually prostrate and pray to God.
That's awesome. And I want to know a little bit more about the prayers. I know that sometimes there's a direction. Is it the east,
Mm-hmm.
or it's the east? And does that change at all, or is it always that?
Yeah.
Can you explain
So
a little bit?
It's a good question. The direction changes based on where you are. So every time you pray, you're essentially praying to the Kaaba, or basically the position that's in Mecca, right? So
Mm.
another part of Muslims' religion, one of the pillars is going to pilgrimage, going to Mecca, and that's essentially where Muslims pray to. It's one central location where all the prayers, when you pray, you should be facing towards. So that just
Mm.
changes depending on where you actually are at the time of prayer.
Got it. Okay. And then there's a lot of I have questions about like fasting. I know that you guys that you guys uphold a certain amount of time that you fast. When do you fast? I know can you explain Ramadan to me? Is that how you pronounce it, Ramadan?
Correct. Yep. So that actually just wrapped up a few weeks ago.
Oh,
But
nice.
Ramadan is essentially what's known to be like the holiest month in Islam, right? This is the month where you abstain from all food and water for essentially
Mm.
the whole day while during the sun is up. And the
Mm.
idea behind it is to not only learn restraint, but it's to take you out of your routine so you can actually focus on becoming more, becoming better at your religion and becoming
Yeah.
more spiritual and closer to God. So the idea is that if you spend less time doing your routine things and less time worried about food intake and water intake, you can replace that time spent on getting closer to God. And you learn a lot about yourself, right? It's a month
Yeah.
filled with a lot of prayer, a lot of religion, a lot of family time. So it's a very, very spiritual month.
So it's a whole month.
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay,
30,
is it the month
29
of May
days.
or
So it does change every year. Ramadan either moves up or moves forward, depending on how you look at it, but it's
Mhm.
based off of the Islamic calendar. So
Got it.
every year it does change in terms of like when Ramadan actually happens. And then the other big piece of Ramadan is that that's essentially when the Quran was brought down upon the Prophet Muhammad. So
Mhm.
that's also a very big piece in Islam. It's known as Laylatul Qadr. And so there is one day within Ramadan that's specified to be the most holy day, right? And that's because the Quran was actually brought down from God to the Prophet Muhammad. That's essentially what Muslims believe.
Okay. Okay, that's cool, man. Thank you for explaining that. I do want to touch
Dropping
base
facts
on
on you. Just dropping
uh,
facts.
just dropping. Yeah, man, that's what the world needs right now. We need more facts, and that's kind of why I started this idea for this podcast in particular. I just wanted to add some light into some people's knowledge and to like just let them know, hey, there's other things out there. You know, you choose what you want. I've never been preachy on.
Right.
I've always told people that faith is important, and I think that so long as you have a faith, to me, I value that, and I think that all faiths are beautiful. Everyone has their own perspective, and I think we can learn a lot from each other. And
Definitely.
the last two questions I want to touch on are one, how do you react to people that say that Islamic beliefs are oppressing women in general? Or like, you know, how sometimes right now we're facing a lot of movements. We're facing the Black Lives Matter. We have a lot of active feminists now, and so I want to address that because there's a lot of people who I've known express hate towards this religion in particular because of that. So can you talk? And I've seen that there's a lot of progressive in the show Rami. There's a what was it the shot
The Sheikh.
the sheikh.
Yeah.
Sorry, my mispronunciation. And maybe you can touch on that a little bit.
Yeah. So ironically, whenever you think of religion, and this goes for any religion, you do have to separate out, the religion from the people following the religion, right? So there is definitely a difference between Islam and Muslims. Like there might
Yeah,
be a difference between Christianity and Christians.
yeah.
Because people are not perfect. They're not going to follow each religion to the T, right? And then you bring in cultural norms, and now you're sort of moving in a lot of different ways. And so in Islam, the actual religion, there is
Mhm,
no difference between men and women, right? They're essentially the same. They have the same rights. One is not above the other. In
mhm,
fact, in a lot of different Quranic verses and hadith, there's a lot to say that a man isn't a man unless he essentially takes into account, right, what women say and what women think and what women do. And
Wow.
so it's very gender neutral when you think of the religion. Now, oftentimes in the culture, for example, if we take an extreme case like in Saudi Arabia,
Yeah.
uh, they actually don't have a lot of women rights, even though they claim to be very Islamic, right? And they're the upholders of essentially Muslim values. So
Yeah.
there's definitely a clash between what the religion teaches and taking things completely out of context to apply these cultural norms in order to have a society where, in the case of Saudi Arabia, they think that's appropriate, right?
Yeah.
Uh, the beautiful thing or the nice thing today is that women are saying no, the religion doesn't say this. And so, how are you saying and claiming that the culture is based off of the religion when we know the religion doesn't say it? And so, the culture is
Yeah.
essentially BS, right? And that's why you see a lot of changes in Saudi Arabia. For example, like historically, women weren't able to drive there, and
Hmm.
now they can, right? And that's just the beginning.
Yeah.
Essentially, they're not going to stop, and there's definitely an uprising, and I support that completely because in Islam, again, historically, if you look back, like the first woman in Islam who built the first school, she was a woman, right? And when you think of education and you think of building a business and an entity, you don't necessarily associate that with women at the time when all these religions were coming to fruition. And so
Yeah.
Islam actually had a woman that started a lot of this stuff, and so that's very empowering. It is unfortunate, though, that a lot of Arab cultures and a lot of different Islamic countries
Yeah.
have let their cultures sort of move away from that and have adopted this sense of like misogynistic viewpoints, and that's totally incorrect and actually goes against the religion.
Thank you for touching on that. I think that's very important to understand, and a lot of it has to do with us as men. We have to be responsible
Correct.
and hold those other people accountable. So I'm glad you've cleared that up for me and for hopefully others. And the last thing I want to touch on is you are dating someone who is not practicing your
Correct.
religion, but obviously respects it because you guys have been dating for quite a bit now. And so I'm just curious as to how that is working for you when it comes to faith. Has that been a conversation that you've had? When do you think people should have that convo, and what that looks like?
Yeah. And it's good to call out like dating in Islam is forbidden, right? And that's why I'm not necessarily your perfect staple Muslim. We
Mm,
all make mistakes, and we all make different decisions. But dating is
hmm.
definitely one of the things that's forbidden in Islam for a variety of different reasons, right? And
Yeah,
I
you know
implore
what?
each person to look into it.
No, go ahead. Continue. Sorry.
Yep, and I implore each person to look into it and sort of make their judgment in terms of no one is perfect, but you do have to make some decisions, and some decisions might come in conflict with your religion. Dating someone else out of the religion, it's hard and it's not hard at the same time. I think it definitely will force you to communicate if you do care about religious beliefs, right? Like for me, Islam
Yeah.
is not just something that I grew up with, it's something that I consciously make an effort to be a good Muslim and to do things that are Islamic. It's a big part of my identity, right? So when
Hmm.
I met my girlfriend, obviously she doesn't come from a Muslim background, but ironically, she shared a lot of the same characteristics similar to me that I identify as, the reason I have these characteristics is because of my religion, right?
Yeah.
And so that's why I talk a lot about intent. Even though you don't necessarily just claim like I'm Muslim, you can actually have a lot of the characteristics and a lot of the intent that is exemplified by the religion itself. So
Yeah.
I try to look beyond just labels because you can have a lot of people that say they're Muslim and their actions are horrendous, right? That go against Islam. And
Yeah.
so who are we to basically say this person's Muslim, this person's not Muslim, or whatever it is, this person's Christian or not Christian? I try to look at
Yeah.
the actions and the behavior of that person. Now, it is important to communicate because, you know, we think about the future, right? Predominantly in the US, it's not a Muslim country, right? It's a Christian Catholic country for the most part.
Yeah.
And so when I think of having a future family and future kids, it's important for me for them and for me to have them not essentially lose that identity, right? Or lose that touch
Yeah.
because it's such a big part of my life. And so when I, talk about a future family or kids with my girlfriend, we
Hmm.
definitely talk about this notion of like, how would we raise them? Would we raise them Muslim? Would we raise them Christian? And again, I think that's where communication is super, super critical and super important because
Yeah.
you don't want to essentially get into a place where in the future, if you're trying to press and make sure kids grow up with a certain religion, and your significant other wants to also make sure they grow up with another identity, it could be confusing for the kids, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
And
for
so that's
sure.
something very critical. Which holiday do we celebrate? Which would do, like, how do we actually do things? Can they eat pork? Can they not eat pork?
Yeah,
Right? Things like that can seem small in the beginning, but could actually lead to a lot of problems in the future. And that's why communication is very important when it comes to this topic.
for sure. For sure. That I mean, communication in general, for
Absolutely.
anything.
Absolutely.
But yeah, that I can totally see how that fits. You did say one thing right now, just now, that I completely forgot about, the no pork thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you can you touch
No, it's
base on that?
funny because this no pork thing, it's one of the like big no-nos in Islam. Even though
Okay.
it feels like small, like some people will do the most like egregious things,
Yeah.
but like they will not eat pork. It's like, no way, man. Like that's crazy. I cannot do that. But they're doing like some insane stuff. Right?
Okay.
So it's kind of ironic, and it's just a big no-no because pork is basically like it comes from pig, and pig is more or less seen to be like a dirty animal, right? It's the same for
Yeah.
Judaism. And
Yeah.
so again, since the religion's a lot about cleanliness, it sort of goes against that. And it's contradictory to how you're supposed to essentially act out the religion. But
Yeah.
because it's sort of simple to do, like just avoid pork. People are definitely very like passionate about like no pork. Again, even though they might
Yeah.
be taking actions that are way worse than just eating pork or not eating pork, right? So it's ironic.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't ate pork myself in like almost 7 years now.
Yeah. How does
So,
it feel?
dude, I don't miss it. I loved turkey bacon more
Yeah.
before I gave up pork anyway. And honestly, I haven't ate beef either, so no cow meat
Nice.
myself. I do eat chicken and turkey and all the
Mhm.
other white meats, but yeah, it's just I don't know. I could totally relate with that. I did grow up in a meat eating family. Latinos love barbecue, and
Mhm.
I did that change. My perspective changed on that when I went to a friend's farm on the East Coast when I lived in Philly, and I celebrated Thanksgiving with a different family. And they were like, in this family, you don't eat the food that you can't kill. So if you want to
Oh,
eat
wow.
something, you have to be able to kill it. I mean, this is like a totally American, hunting and like all that. Like that
Right.
was that was what they grew up with, and they were like, yeah, here you have to earn your right to eat something. And so when they gave me that perspective, I was like, hey, I couldn't do this. I couldn't kill a cow.
Yeah.
I couldn't kill a pig. Chickens, I don't feel too bad for. And I know that sounds like really mean, but like it's just not as heavy when you see, because this family in particular, I saw them what they did to this particular pig,
Mhm.
and it was like life changing for me in the sense that I was like, no, I can't ever do this again. I can't have this meat.
And that concept, I mean, it's ironic that you bring it up because that concept even exists in Islam. So
Oh,
oftentimes you'll
does
hear
it?
this word called halal.
Uh
Uh,
huh.
Halal basically refers to like how the animal was killed, right? And so
Mm,
there's definitely rules and specifications in terms of killing an animal, butchering an animal before it can actually be eaten. And
mm,
so whether something is halal or not is also a big part of the religion because you shouldn't be consuming meat in Islam unless it is halal, which means that essentially the animal was respected before it was butchered. And so it's a little bit similar to essentially what you're saying with like,
no, dude,
the,
that's beautiful. I really, how beautiful would it be if you like go to Chipotle and they're like,
yeah.
this chorizo was respected
Respected.
before.
I mean, yeah, unfortunately it was still butchered, so the end result's the same, but at
No,
least
I know.
it's made to respect.
No, that's really cool, man. I really want to thank you for being open to doing this and for educating me and for teaching me a lot of things and for just being an example that, that you can be a good person and have these great intentions, and it doesn't matter what label people give
Absolutely.
you. And I really want to just say thanks for doing this and appreciate you, man. Thank
Of
you.
course. Appreciate you for having me on.
For sure, man. And if you guys have any questions, if you guys would like to learn anything else about Islamic beliefs, do you know any good resources, B?
Yeah, there's this thing called Google. It's pretty helpful. I would start there. Obviously, some resources might be more biased than others, so I definitely
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
recommend at a um, number of
I was trying
different.
to get you to plug in your church, but
Yeah, I
but
don't know. I'm good. I'm good.
all right, for sure. I appreciate you, man. Thanks again for doing this.
All right, thanks, Hugo.